Welcome to State of Unity podcast, where we talk with people who used to live the ordinary and are now living in the extraordinary. Katie has ran marathons across the Great Wall of China, through the Serengeti, and is planning to tackle Antarctica. Through group travel experiences, she gained the courage to travel the former USSR on her own, all 15 countries. She now continues to use every sweet PTO day to experience something new and make friends along the way. Oh, Katie, so thank you so much for joining me. So the conversation in the group chat that we were a part of, that you and I both agreed we were in many times, is when people are we're talking about our travels and sharing it with people, and the response is, "Oh, you're so brave," or "I could never do that," or "I wish I could do that." And I loved how so many women in this chat responded the same way, like, "Well, why can't you?" And we try to help people understand, like, you can do this. And so I know for me, it was probably a process of a couple of different trips. And I also feel like now a lot of people's inspiration comes from probably things they see online, mostly Instagram. And you and I started traveling before Instagram existed. And I love, so was it your first major trip that you did was to the USSR?
I would say, so that was my career break trip. So I had traveled quite a bit before then. Mostly I kind of started off doing group trips. So after I finished law school, sort of the tradition is to take a post-bar trip. So after you take the bar exam, but before you start working, you have like a month off, and a lot of people will use that to travel. So I did a 3.5-week trip around Europe with a tour group that was one of those like 35 people on the bus, and you spend one night in every city, and very, very hectic. But it was enough that it, kind of got that travel bug going in me. And then I did a couple more group trips before finally doing my first solo trip to Australia. And then did a few more solo trips after that before I decided to take a year off and spend a year traveling through the former USSR. So that was by far the longest trip that I had done. It was 13 months, but I had done a little bit of solo travel before then.
Okay. So when you did the group travel, was it the same organization that you did all the different trips with, or was it a couple of different companies that you tried?
Yeah, the first 3 trips that I did were all with the same company. Three of the first ones, I did like the Europe whirlwind trip. And then a couple of years later, 2 years later, I went back to Spain with the same company. That was a little less whirlwind. That one, it was like 3 nights in Barcelona, 3 nights in Madrid, 3 nights in Ibiza. So Nice. It was a little slower paced.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in there, I went to Egypt with a different company. And that was Egypt was kind of what got me interested in like getting more off the beaten path and getting a little bit more adventurous. I'm a huge history buff. I love ruins and everything. And I worked the trip to Egypt in so that I had the tour, but then I had like 2 days at the beginning in Cairo on my own, and then like 2 days at the end on my own. And so I had the opportunity to do, kind of see what it was like to do solo travel a little bit, particularly in a place that's not sort of, like European, not Western, not, kind of culture that I'm used to. So
that's a great idea, because that way you're not like, you're already there with the group, you're getting the understanding with them, and then it's really just a couple days that you're left to figure out on your own. That's great.
Yeah, that's what I always tell people when they've never traveled solo before and they're thinking about it. I tell people, I'm like, try group travel first. And to me, group travel is kind of a form of solo travel, because on each of these trips, I was signing up as a solo person. Like I think on all of them, I agreed to get matched with a roommate. So I was randomly paired with a roommate, so I didn't have to pay a single supplement. But I didn't know anyone going into the trips, so in that respect, it was a solo trip. It happened to be that I was part of this group. And what I liked, particularly with the one to Spain, was that they basically we started off with, it was like a city tour Barcelona. And then the tour guide just kind of told us what else there was to do in Barcelona. And then we were kind of on our own and we could meet back up for dinner every night. So you sort of had that built-in social life that sometimes, people wonder, oh, how am I going to meet people? Who am I going to go out with? That was built in. But then during the day, we were really on our own to explore how we wanted. And so it can really be a great way to get you comfortable with solo travel, to do that group trip first. And especially the small group travel. I mean, it's not the huge 40 people on the bus thing that I did when I Europe, which I would not do again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds, so when my friend and I did Italy, we had a short amount of time, but we wanted to, there's so much to see there. And we kind of had the feeling this probably, there's so much to see in the world. So we want to plan it we're not going to go back and see as much as we can see. And so we did, I think the most we ever stayed at one place was 2 nights. And a lot of the nights we're doing, the overnight train or overnight whatever, so that we're, traveling and just killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And we both agreed at the end of that, we're it was cool. We saw a lot, but you still need those rest days.
Yes.
We learned that lesson.
Yeah.
So can you tell me again, because I just want people, I love how you came up with the concept of going to the former, is it the former USSR? Am I saying it right?
Yeah, former USSR, former Soviet Union.
Okay.
Potato,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so I had really been interested in Russia from the time I was in junior high school. I did a book report on Catherine the Great, who was one of the great empresses of Russia, and got super interested in Russian royalty and the czars and all of that. And then kind of continued into college. I majored in Russian and East European studies. I took Russian language. When I went to do that post-bar trip, I actually initially looked at going to Russia, and people were like, oh, you don't want Russia to be your first trip overseas. You need to go somewhere easier. So of course, at the time I listened and did the Europe thing. But it was always in the back of my head of I need to get to Russia. I need to get to Russia. And so when I started thinking about taking time off, and it initially was just going to be taking a summer off when I was going to leave Chicago, which is where I was living at the time, and move back home to Minnesota. And just find a new job. And so I was going to take the summer off, and Russia was what I focused on. And then for various reasons, I ended up pushing that off. And as I started looking at more areas and reading about more things, at some point I was I just did a Google search, and I was what's a list of all of the former Soviet countries? And there were 15, and I had already identified 8 that I wanted to go to. And so I was I'm just going to make this the theme of my trip and just go to all of them. It was a nice way to sort of organize it, because I was also looking at oh, and Bulgaria looks cool, and Romania and the Balkans. And so it was okay, no, we're going to focus on these 15 countries.
Yes.
And not get too carried away,
yeah.
Which 15 countries in 13 months is still a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was how it kind of all came about. So
how far in advance did you start your planning?
Oh gosh, probably about a year and a half.
Okay.
One of the big questions, and one of the things people always ask me is, how much does it cost? How much do you need to save? And that was something I didn't really know at the time. And so my planning kind of started with trying to put together what an itinerary would look like and figure out what it would cost to visit these countries, and that consisted of using my Lonely Planet guidebook and, looking up and being oh, there's hostels in Moscow for $20 a night. Okay, that's what I'll budget for Moscow. And I mean, it was very unscientific. um, and then sort of looking at, okay, I think I would take the train from, Moscow to St. Petersburg. How much is that going to cost me? And I literally kind of mapped out an itinerary for, at the time I left, it was going to be for 10 months was what I had sort of budgeted for. And then, came up with a number and was like, okay, that's what I need to save before I go. And then I worked in a little bit of a cushion for when I came home. So I'd have some money to live off of, like, before I found a job again. But yeah, so it was about a year and a half. And I used that time, I sold pretty much everything, sold all my furniture, all of that. I owned my condominium at the time, so I had to find somebody to rent that out to. So there were a lot of different logistics that I was going through at the time, in addition to just trying to save money for the trip.
And did you at any point just think like, this is too much? Why am I doing this?
I didn't. I was lucky. I had previously owned a different place in Chicago that I had sold for a decent profit. So I started with a good amount of money in the bank and didn't have to save that much more. I mean, I think I was in a better place than a lot of people are in when they start thinking about doing something like this. Mm-hmm. And I was traveling to, some places I went to were relatively cheap, but like Moscow is not a cheap city. Mm-hmm. And so compared to, like, just by comparison, I had a friend who I met through traveling and through travel blogging, who was on the road about the same time I was. And he traveled for 2 years and spent the same amount of money that I spent in 13 months. But he did all of his travels in Southeast Asia and South America. And so he was in play, and he had no qualms about staying in like hostel dorms with 15 people. And that was not for me. Like, I was going to do a dorm. I tried to keep it to like 4 people, 8 people. But after a while I was like, yeah, I need a private room. Like,
yeah.
I'm sure like I can't handle the dorms.
Yeah. Well, that's something I was going to say too. Like, the exchange rate makes just a massive difference on the budget. What a day in Italy versus a day in Southeast Asia is.
Yeah.
You can't even compare. So yeah, I think that's something, if people are looking to do on their own, definitely take into consideration the exchange rate.
Yeah. And when I was saving, I often tried to think of things in those terms. Like, I was living in Chicago before I did the trip. And so a normal night out in Chicago with my friends at that time might be $100. If we go out to dinner and we, share a couple of bottles of wine, and then we go for drinks afterwards, and then a taxi home, like, it adds up. And so, I would sort of look at it and be like, okay, I can spend $100 on a night out with my friends, or $100 is 5 nights in a hostel. Yeah. And just sort of, and it made it easier for me to, sort of wrap my head around, and, sort of cutting back on my social life a little bit, and, putting that money toward the trip instead.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And so now you are in DC working, and you work full time, but you get a good chunk of vacation. And
yes.
Obviously when you travel and you're staying in the places like that, like the hostels or the more community inspired housing, you feel like the majority of people travel. I always feel like everyone else travels more than I do. They're professional travelers. And even just the online community, it's such a push towards these digital nomads, and everyone can do it, and you should do it too. And we had kind of talked a little bit about, like, what if that doesn't feel like the right choice? Like, what if you like working and you like having this homestead and place where you belong, but you still want to see the world a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. By the time I was done with my trip, 13 months on the road, I was really ready to come back. I feel like so much of the conversation around the, become a digital nomad, quit your job to travel, sort of presents this dichotomy of, you're either stuck in this cubicle in this corporate dead end job that you hate and you're miserable versus you can be out seeing the world. And I feel like there's a lot of in between. And for me, I've spent most of my career working at universities or at nonprofits. I've never worked in a cubicle office. And I work in a field fundraising where I'm raising money for things like student scholarships. And I used to work for a nonprofit that did environmental work. I worked for another nonprofit that focused on press freedom issues. So I'm doing things that I feel like are really making a difference and that I find fulfilling. But then with that, I've enjoyed really good benefits. I've gotten, I have really good health insurance. I get good time off. I've never had less than 4 weeks of vacation, which is like unheard of in the US. I get 5 weeks off a year in my current job. And they understand, I don't hide the fact at all. Like when I've interviewed for, jobs that I like to travel, and travel is a big part of my life, and I'm going to use all those vacation days. And, and I've had, bosses that understand that and really appreciate that, they see that as a positive. And so I don't think it has to be this whole work in a miserable corporate job or go be a digital nomad and travel. I think there are ways that you can really find fulfillment in working a full-time job, but still make travel a really big part of your life.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you kind of nailed it too. At the end of the day, the point is really finding a purpose, right? Like you just need to be passionate about something. And if you have a career that you're making a difference and you're passionate there, then stay in your calling and do your thing, but also like see the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Which you're seeing a part of the world next, well, maybe not next, but next year that most people have not ventured to, which is Antarctica, right? A marathon of sorts.
Yes. This is a trip 5 years in the making.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm a runner. I've been working on a goal of running a marathon on each continent, which Antarctica is a continent, so it requires going to Antarctica to fulfill. There are a couple of companies out there that put on marathons in Antarctica. I think one of the best known ones is a company called Marathon Tours, and they run tours to different marathons and races all over the world. And the Antarctica one is very limited in space. And so it fills up several years in advance. And so I put my initial deposit on a trip back in 2017 for a trip that should have gone to Antarctica in March of 2020. Now, maybe I knew something without knowing I knew something, but in 2019, so you have to pay the whole thing like a year in advance, and Antarctica is not cheap. And so when 2019 rolled around, I was going to have to make over the course of 2019, I was going to have to make the full payment for the 2020 trip. And I was like, I had just changed jobs, and I was, for a variety of reasons, I was like, I really don't feel like I can, swing paying for this trip. Can I defer a year? And I remember saying at the time, like, if I'm going to pay for this, I would basically have to spend a whole year not traveling. Little did I know. And so I deferred it to 2021. Well, then obviously COVID happens. I spend all of 2020 not traveling. And so I am able to save up, all the money and the vacation time that I otherwise would have utilized during 2020. And so they reached out this past March, and they were like, we have an opportunity. We're running 2 trips in 2022 to try to make up the backlog of 2 years of canceled. And so you have the opportunity to secure your spot for the 2022 trip. And I was just like, all right, count me in.
Wow, that's going to be an experience.
Yeah. So I'm still, they have you buy, because it's Antarctica, they have you buy kind of specialized travel insurance, that covers, everything and stuff. And I just had to pay the second deposit. So I'm sort of, but they're still sort of like, don't necessarily book your flights yet. We're still keeping an eye on the COVID situation,
Yeah.
all of that. So I'm, fingers crossed that it will actually happen. I kind of suspect they'll probably add like a requirement that everybody be vaccinated and whatnot. But
Yeah. Well, and I can only imagine how much that costs because I love climbing is my new thing. And so I've looked up how much it is to climb. I can't remember what the name of the summit there. But again, it's a continent, so it's one of the 7 summits. And there's the one type of plane that flies there. And so you have to take this plane from the specific place, and you have, like you said, the gear alone. And so I think not including the gear, just doing the trek to the summit was like $45,000.
whoa.
So
The
I'm like, that'd be
marathon's
cool,
not that much.
but
Well, and a big part of that, I think, is the plane.
probably, yeah.
Fly there. Because that, yeah, like mine is more around like 10,000, which is fine with most Antarctica cruises. Like it's a 2-week trip altogether.
Okay.
And we do all of like in addition to the marathon, like the shore excursions and, seeing the penguins and,
Wow, that's going to be so incredible.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited. We start in Buenos Aires and spend a couple nights there and then go down to Ushuaia where we catch the boat. So,
Cool.
to Argentina. So I'm excited for that as well. See Argentina. So
that's so cool. So do you feel like that's going to be the most challenging one?
Probably not, actually. I think so. The 2 of the ones that I've done so far, so the Asia one that I did was the Great Wall Marathon in China. And you actually run a total of about 5 miles actually on the Great Wall.
Oh.
And that is incredibly difficult. Like you're going up steps and down steps and
for 5 miles.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like 2.5 miles at the beginning and then 2.5 miles at the end.
Oh my gosh.
Already run 20 miles.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah. So it was actually, it was very difficult, but it was amazing. Like the whole experience was amazing. And then I've done 2 in Africa, and the second one I did in Africa, it's called the Big 5 Marathon. It's in South Africa. And that was probably the hardest one I've ever done. Like I've said, it's even harder than the Great Wall, because one, it's kind of at altitude. So altitude just kind of adds another level of difficulty. But then you run about 6 miles through sand.
Oh my gosh.
Which is like, and I'm in Washington, D.C., like we don't have beaches here. Like there aren't places for me to practice running in deep sand. And then after you run through the sand, you run up a hill that is like the steepest hill that I've ever tried to run. You can't even run up it. Like you can barely walk up it. It is so ridiculously steep. That was insane. And then even though I got credit for finishing it, I didn't technically finish it because they had to clear people off the course with 1 mile to go because of elephants. Which is like the best excuse to not finish a marathon ever. And they had like Jeeps waiting for us at a certain point. So when we got to that point, they would load us in, drive us past the elephants, and then drop us off with like 200 meters to go to the finish line. So we could like run the last 200 meters and cross the finish line and get our medal.
Wow. So it's like a marathon combined with a safari.
Yes. And actually like the whole thing, it's on a safari reserve. And so you book a package and you spend like a couple of days before and after, like doing safari drives and stuff.
No way. All right.
It's
You're going to
really
have
cool.
to share that information with me. That's right up my alley.
Yeah, it was amazing. I highly recommend it.
So how do you find these different marathons? Is there like a website that has all the craziest marathons in the world listed on it and you just pick the top 5?
There are a couple companies that kind of focus on these. So anyway, there's a company in Denmark called Albatross Adventures, and they're the ones that actually organize a lot of these races. So they put on the Great Wall Marathon, the Big 5 Marathon. they do a race in Petra. I only did the half marathon there, but you basically start in Petra in Jordan and then like run out and back. They do another one in Bagan in Myanmar. I only did the half there as well, but they do a full marathon there too. So they actually organize a lot of these. And so once I found out about the Great Wall one, I did that. And then one of the girls that was in my group there, like we kept in touch, and she reached out to me and was like, hey, do you want to go to Myanmar next fall and do the race in Bagan? And I was like, okay, like this looks really cool. I've never, Myanmar looks, like a cool place to visit. And so we did that one, and then kept in touch with a bunch of people in our group there. And then we all decided to go to Jordan and do the Petra one the following year. And then other people that I kept in touch with, then we all decided to do the Big Five one, which was June of 2019. So it's kind of like this great community of people that like I've met through doing these races, and we keep in touch. And a couple have come here to DC and we've run races together. And I met up with some in Chicago, and it's kind of cool because it's like you go on these trips with them, and everyone loves running and they love travel. So it's like, boom, of course you're going to get along.
Yeah. I think that's been one of the coolest things for me doing this podcast is learning the different ways that people travel. And then also, like, once you understand who you are when it comes to that, how easy it is to meet those people. Like, it just comes naturally because you're in the place where the other people are and you're doing the thing that the other people are doing. So I find that, there's people that I've connected with more closely through travel, and we've spent, less than 24 total hours together, but they're the type of people that I feel super close to, and I wouldn't bat an eye at spending a week traveling with them because I know, we're on that same mindset. We like the same things, and we're also comfortable in our own skin enough where, if I want to go do this and she maybe wants to go do that, it's fine. We're just there to enjoy the experience together. And I think, the people that you meet traveling there's just so many perks to it.
Yeah. I have, just as you were saying that, I was thinking like I met, when I did my tour to Egypt, it was in 2008. And I was the only American in the group it was 13 Australians and me. So I was like the honorary Australian for the week. And I kept in touch with several of them, including one girl and I was one of the older ones on the trip too at the time, kept in touch with several of them. One girl I met up with her when she was living in London, like 3 years later when I went to Wimbledon and met up with her. And then she ended up coming to New York where she's been working ever since. And so she'll come down to DC and I'll meet up with her in New York. And it's like, we've known each other now for 13 years. And every time we meet up, it's just like, we just pick up right where we left off. And, coming from two completely different places, America versus Australia, we're like 8 or 10 years apart in age, travel bridges all of that. And, and you just connect with people through it.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Yeah, it's been cool. And then the more you do that, the more you travel, the more you know people, the places you go, which then you get the local experience, which is, we all know, the best way to travel.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really what gave me the courage to do my first solo trip to Australia, is I had met some Australians on my Europe tour that I kept in touch with. And so I went to Australia knowing like, oh, I know somebody in Melbourne. I know somebody, I have people I can meet up with. And so it just made it a lot easier and more comfortable, flying off on the solo trip, knowing that there were people there that I'd be able to meet up with.
Very cool. Yeah, that's neat. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I love our conversation. We'll have to finish it off air. But so is there anything that we can do to help support you in your mission, your travels, your running?
Oh, gosh. Well, eventually, so I'm in the process of writing a book about the time I traveled through the former USSR. So I'm hoping to self-publish that at some point in the next year is the goal.
Awesome.
So people can, if they follow me on Twitter or Instagram, whenever that does come out, I will share information about that. And I always post about my travels on Instagram primarily. So yeah, so that's probably the best way. And yeah.
Well, then I have one final question, which I love asking people is, if you're gifted a sailboat to sail around the world in, what would you name it?
Oh gosh. Ooh. That's a tough one, in part because like I have this fear of water and I probably would never sail a sailboat because I'd be terrified. Probably, I don't know, probably something about like facing your fears or something, because that's what I would be doing if I was to get in a sailboat to sail around. I'd be like majorly facing my fears.
Okay.
Like I just to give you a sense, when I was in Malawi recently, like one of the things to do, like Lake Malawi is huge. And everyone's like, you can't leave Malawi with spending a couple nights on the lake. And I was like, okay, that's great. But like, I'm not a beach person. I'm not a water person. I want to see the lake and see like some nice sunsets and sunrises, but like, I'm not, going to be out like snorkeling or anything. And so the place I was staying offered like a sunset cruise out to this island. And so I was like, okay, great. Well, the boat that we were on, it was this motorboat, but it was like this rickety, like wooden motorboat.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And there were 3 of us in it, plus the guy driving, plus another guy. And the whole time, one of the guys was like using this little bucket to like take the water out of the boat that was like accumulating in the boat. We weren't even going that far. I mean, it was like 30 minutes out to the island, loop around the island and 30 minutes back. I was so scared the entire time. I was just like, oh my God, this boat is going to sink and I'm going to like sink into Lake Malawi.
Oh, wow.
We weren't even that far from the shore. So like, I don't know how I would manage in a sailboat, like in the middle of the ocean when you can't even see the shoreline anywhere.
Okay, well, we'll leave it attached to the dock then.
Yes, but good question though. I like the question.
Well, hopefully I don't give you nightmares about sailing tonight.
No.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to continuing the conversation with you and reading the book when it comes out. You'll definitely have to let me know.
Definitely, I will do that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, spread the word. Share with a friend, post it, comment, shout out. Let us know. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss another episode. Follow us on our socials and be sure to check out stateofunity.org for upcoming group experiences. This is Cara Irene, hoping we leave you feeling inspired to do more.